You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. When people are having profound spiritual experiences where they come into contact with some other intelligence, and this experience is so profound it changes everything in their lives, but people report different types of intelligences. Sometimes it looks like an alien, sometimes it looks like a psychedelic mix of colors, sometimes it's a bird, sometimes it's an angel. Different people experience these different profound things, but for most of the experiences that I talk to people about, they're positive and they lead them in a positive direction, and they have a very profound message about them personally in their lives, even though they're speaking with different types of beings in whatever state they're in. Are they angels or interdimensional beings? What do you think is that we're interacting with?
Okay, well, in the Christian doctrine, you would have the Christian angelic hierarchy, which would literally be angels, would be like these, well, angelic or metaphysical supernatural beings, right? And that those supernatural beings, I mean, they work in the world. There's no question about that. I mean, you could even go to like everything. Shakespeare writes this sort of stuff, you know, about the nymphs and the fairies and that sort of stuff that are there, right? So in the Christian angelic hierarchy, and of course you see this with, you know, in other variations across the world, you can go to the Norse stuff and the 10 worlds of the, or, you know, 9 worlds on the Yggdrasil tree, or you can go to the Ennead and Greek and Egyptian and et cetera, et cetera. Well, those angels are numbers. They're angles, okay? And then this is literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, those represent the intelligence of God, the intelligences of God or whatever, right? Those, and in Kabbalah, these would be considered the 10 emanations of God, being like, you know, 1 through 10 or 0 through 9, basically, right? Now, the idea is that those are intelligences, and they also have a representation in form. So they have a number, and then they have a geometric form, right? And this is basically the substructure and intelligence behind the creation. Now, when those intelligences reach down to give you a message, this is exactly what Kabbalah means. It means to receive, to actually receive a message, right? It's going to do it in the form in which your consciousness can understand it, right? So I remember I had this psychedelic trip once, and so it's going to come, or a figure that you're going to understand, a bird that you will be like, oh, you know, it's not necessarily a bird. It's not like there's a metaphysical bird that's in the, you know, other worlds that's flying around and came to you, but that's how you understood it. I remember I took this, and it was a really super profound experience, you know, a psychedelic trip with my friend Toby, actually, and I remember I saw this like digital like serpent thing. And I was like in space or whatever, and immediately I was like, oh, I mean, at the time I was like, oh, it's like the Milky Way or whatever, right? But I still had in my mind, I was still on a ball, I was still thinking in space and things like that. So even though this thing was like in space, if you will, I was having an experience. The only reason I understood that is because I didn't have the consciousness level to understand that, oh, I'm not in space. So it came to me as I could understand it. And I think this is actually what's going on when you see in psychedelic experiences or even in dreams or stuff like that. It's like you get these, you know, these weird figures that come up, and, you know, they're there, and you even said it yourself, they have something specific to say to you. Well, that's because it's coming through your consciousness. So anyway, that's how I would see that.
It seems like there are some individuals that have these profound spiritual contact experiences, but somehow their ego gets in the way of the message, and then they start talking about extraterrestrial contact and maybe form a cult and all these things that aren't really the basis of the message. It seems like this happens a lot for people in the UFO extraterrestrial realms, that maybe they are having these experiences that you can't explain with beings that might look alien to humans, but they're not really receiving the message correctly or misunderstanding something. Is that what you think could be possibly happening with some of these contact cases?
Well, yeah, and you're just trying to explain your experience with the limited way that you can too. You know what I mean? So you have limitations in your own, you know, explaining too. So then you have this otherworldly experience that you can't really language or whatever, and then you just try to start, you know, putting it down or explaining it. You just can't. You just lose, you know? So, and then also with the UFO thing too, I think you see that what gets implanted in your head. Well, basically the whole like, you know, gray alien with the big eyes, that sort of thing. I mean, that was propagandized and placed into our heads again and again and again and again, right? Well, eventually that gets stuck in your head. And then when you have an experience, and then what's your brain expect to see?
Yeah.
All of a sudden I saw the gray alien too, or whatever. It's just like the same thing that people have these images. It's no different with Jesus. No different. I had this revelation of Jesus, and he came and I saw Jesus, and he looked just like all of the paintings of Jesus look. Well, why? That's because you've been seeing it since forever. That doesn't mean that that's the genuine article. Then you go and actually do a cross-reference to all the paintings of Jesus, and you can't tell me that they all look the same, right? One's got red hair, so you know what I mean? And so therefore, it's like that plays a part of it too. So I mean,
these are just like spiritual egregores that have become these eternal like archetypes that we look to and that have been passed down through the arts and entertainment and stories that we've latched onto, that when we have these experiences, that's the first thing that we're going to see or pop into our mind, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like especially when you look at like constellations too, you know, it's almost like these archetypes that we talk about though have been put into the sky and have been creatively crafted into those, you know, like, I mean, when you look at the constellations like the king and the queen of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, you know, it's like a classic archetype of a king or queen. You got Draco the dragon, of course, once again, a metaphysical or supernatural archetype of a being, you know. And so, or the, you know, the warrior or the hunter, you got Perseus or you got Orion, that sort of thing. These are archetypal things that a lot of people in some way experience in their life. You know what I mean? About in some way, I think you get what I'm saying, right? So I think the people that have come before us have actually created these systems to help us understand some of this stuff, you know?
I've asked you this before, I believe, but I wanted to revisit it. The Jesus archetype and figure, do you think this was a real incarnated person at one time?
Well, you know, the position that we take is that, I mean, and this is actually explained in a lot of like Gnostic teachings and stuff like that too, is that the scriptures are not there to be a history book, okay? So it isn't to say that Jesus Christ wasn't a real person. In fact, you know, when you actually look at it, was there some sort of historical person that these scriptures and these stories are based on? Absolutely. In fact, if you just look at it logically, you can't really pick up any author that's written a good story or a classic work of literature that did not base the characters on, or even an aggregate of people or experiences that he's had or he or she has had. It's just, you can't, that's like rule, you know, one as an author. It's like you draw from the experiences and things that have actually happened. So when you read scripture, it isn't to say that there wasn't a Jesus or, you know, there wasn't some figure that this stuff is based on that was absolutely a hero figure in his time and you know, went against the scribes and all this other stuff. But scripture is a mythological is a mythological telling of this man's life. And all religious scripture, if you will, is essentially that. It's anthropomorphism, it's, you know, personification, you know, all of those sorts of tools, literary tools that you find in the Bible. So, you know, short answer, long answer short. Basically, it's like, yeah, I mean, but the Jesus that people are reading in the Bible, they read this and then they think they immediately have to graft it onto history. And because of that, people don't have any inroads into the Bible. And so, well, I just put that aside. I was like, that's not what this is intended to do, you know? So, and that's where all the insights come from. That's where really the encryption and really deciphering what these stories really mean come from, because I am not chained or shackled to a faulty interpretation or a presupposition about what the Bible is. And this is 2,000 years ago and that sort of thing. So.
On. Now, I know you've done a lot of work looking into the origins of our language in the English language and how it connects to these spiritual energies and things that we were discussing earlier. What kind of spiritual effects or repercussions do you think that changes in our language, like slang?